Thank you all for coming. You should all be at work, but I'm glad you're here. It's really special to see DJ Screw honored in an institution such as this. You know, there's a lot of history here. As a matter of fact, I have history with this place. So most of you probably came in the front door, but it's also a side door. And in December of 1997, when I was 24 years old, I came to that side door one night and somebody opened it up and I slipped inside. And there was a big room and there's 3 or 4 tables set up, covered in dirt and wheelbarrows full of dirt. And my friend says, "Oh my God, thank you so much. Obviously we need help." And so I did help. So what we did is we took the dirt, for the purposes of where we're going, we'll call it earth. We took the earth out of the wheelbarrows. We put it onto the tables. We packed it on the tables well past midnight, stayed until the middle of the night. A few days later, I come to the opening. It's an artist named Ann Hamilton. And went all over the museum looking for these big tables full of dirt. Couldn't find them anywhere, so I walked into the right room. Big tables covered in gigantic white blankets tucked underneath, all of my work, invisible. I was so proud. I think I'd brought somebody with me, like, come check this out, man. I was a part of this, you know. Because at this point, this is before I'm writing. This is like, I'm a musician. I've worked in visual art my entire life, screen printing, offset printing, graphic design. This is the kind of stuff I do. So to be a part of, you know, of a big visual piece like this, like, really meant something to me. And I don't even really know that I realized at the time, but it was also at the point when I walked in, I see these gigantic, like, vinyl sheets covering up all the mud and dirt and earth that I was packing onto these tables. Like, that was the part where the art sort of opened up for me. Because here I was, knowing that, like, you know, part of this whole project was the night where, you know, I'm a part of it. The night where I come in here and I'm packing these tablesfuls of dirt. And I think that DJ Screw and his screw tapes are very much the same way, because there's really no screw tape that there wasn't somebody present for, or somebody involved with, or somebody who was there maybe freelancing, freestyling on the tape, or maybe it was a personal tape. But either way, you know, every one of DJ Screw's tapes has a story associated with it, has maybe multiple stories, depending on who was there that night. So, you know, for me, it was really special to be part of something that night. And I think that, you know, we get influenced by art, especially when we go to the art museum and we're soaking up so much of it all at one time. I think we get influenced by it in ways that maybe we don't really discover until years later. And so that's where I am when it comes to the work of DJ Screw, because I'm going back and, you know, I've been working on a book about Screw, and I'm going back and I'm peeling apart all these layers of work that he's been doing, what he was doing for 10 years, but, you know, now we've been going back and looking at it for 20 years, and it continues to reveal its complexities along the way. So what are those complexities? Start off very simple. Robert Earl Davis Jr. coming back and forth between Houston and Smithville, Texas, grows up in his younger years in Houston, goes to Smithville. That's where he discovers hip-hop, comes back to Houston. In Smithville, he's got a borrowed turntable. He's got a boom box. He wires them up together. He's using the little switcher where you can go between sources as his crossfader. Primitive has a little tape recorder next to it, laying down on the floor, yelling into the tape recorder. That's how he's actually hosting his tapes. This is really early. This is 1985, 1986. 1986, he comes to Houston. What's going on in Houston then? Rhinestone Wrangler is sort of at the end of its battle rap era, moving into its second incarnation up on the north side. Kids Jam is on the radio. DJ Daryl Scott is the hottest mixtape DJ in town. Really pretty much the hottest mixtape, you know, hottest DJ in the clubs. So when Screw gets here, he's got this whole new enormous world of influence to sort of sift through. This entire, you know, massive, all of these different influences, all of these people who are maybe just a few years older than him. Lester Sir Pace is on the radio. Jazzy Red is on the radio. MC Wicked Cricket is booking shows around town. So he starts picking up on this, upgrades his gear a little bit, starts making tapes. Moves from a place he lived on the south side to an apartment building called Quail Meadows, which is where he starts to really meet the people who are going to form the first support network for what he's doing. This is the first place that somebody buys a tape from him. Hey, let me buy one of those tapes from me. Okay, you know, and then there's another person, Poppy, at Quail Meadows, who is the person who starts bringing people in. Hey, come get your tape from DJ Screw. So starts making tapes, starts making personalized tapes, people bringing them lists. Okay, these are the songs that I want on my tape. Eventually moves on to the point where he's slowing down these tapes. You know, slowing down is not something new. Daryl Scott was doing it on his tapes. You know, out in Miami, Disco Dave, Jam Pony Express were slowing down tapes, making drag tapes. You know, anybody who has a record player has probably put a 45 on at 33 and experienced the record being slowed down. But for Screw, it was more like he was moving in this direction because, who knows, lots of different influences. Certainly one of them was Daryl Scott, who, you know, would run out of his own mixtapes, selling them at McGregor Park on Sunday afternoons. Couldn't print up enough of them. Finally opens up his own record store to sell his mixtapes in. Probably an influence on Screw right there. The tapes eventually graduate to a point where Screw's calling people, hey, okay, so I'm making your tape, and I'm going to make the last song. Come on over so you can do shout-outs on the last song. People come over, they start doing shout-outs. You know, they're talking about their neighborhoods. Maybe they're talking about just themselves. Maybe they're talking about whatever's going on. But voices start to appear on those tapes. In 1994, he moves into a house of his own, he and his girlfriend, and at that point, he's got no more rules. He's got no more, you got to finish this up by 10 p.m., you can't have people over right now, anything like that. So this is where things really, really change for DJ Screw, because he's already got the slowing down of the tapes. He's already got the chopping. He's mixing that in right there. But when 1994 comes around and people can come over his house, people start freestyling on the tapes. C-Note was the first one. Fat Pat was an early one. Lil Kiki was an early one. Herschel Wood Hardheads. They start to freestyle on those tapes. And this sort of changes the way that Screw is handling the music, because all of a sudden, when he's mixing a song onto one of the tapes, there's a reason to extend it. There's a reason to draw it out even further. There's a reason to slow it down. There's a reason to kind of stretch it out. And so the artists that are coming over his house aren't even really necessarily artists. Some of them are just guys that come over, all want a tape. And then he hands them the mic, starts to push them in that direction. And so, you know, their voices are starting to come out on the tapes. He's starting to slow the music down a little bit more. Long swaths of the tapes are becoming more instrumental. He's driving the whole time. You know, he's dictating the vibe. And all of these artists are picking up on that vibe. And all these artists are starting to develop their styles right alongside that. So therein being the two different components that you see of a Screw tape. You got the slowing and chopping. Sometimes you get a tape, that's all there is on there. It's just a bunch of songs, slowed and chopped, mixed together. Other tapes, maybe you get some of that, and then you get a stretch where there's a freestyle. And it might be 10 minutes, might be 15 minutes, might be, I think June 27th is 35 minutes. So he's really stretching all of this stuff out, and in doing so, creating artists out of the people who are on the tapes, because they may have come in having bars, they may have come in being someone who freestyled in the streets. They may come in being someone who had maybe some designs on being an artist. But the reality was that Screw was listening to them, and he was listening really deeply to the music in a way where he was digging into the music and creating a great art around them. And so everybody who was coming into his house was exposed to this. Everybody who was coming into his house, as a matter of fact, was swarmed by this, because this was the sound. Screw knew exactly where he was going with that. Lil Randy was on Donnie Houston's radio show the other night and talking about something interesting that Screw did that not many DJs do, which is that his turntables are wired up the opposite way that most DJs have them. As in, if you got the way your crossfader is usually wired up, if you go this direction with it, you're going to this turntable. If you go this direction with it, you're going to this turntable. Screw's was wired the opposite way, so that if he's pulling the fader away from the turntable, he's actually going to that one. Now, in the work that I've done and just talking to people, I already think that Screw visualized his music. I think that Screw was a very super visual person, and I think he could see in advance where he was going. I think that Screw could see the shape of his music as he was making it and before he was making it, and he knew exactly where he was going. That's why he takes his time with it when you listen to his tapes, and that's why you hear him sort of dictating the vibe, you know, and slowing things down and directing things. He was always very much in charge. But when you think about the visual space in your head that it takes to move the crossfader away from something as opposed to it, I think that that was actually a really, really big part of Screw's sound, because when you think about it, he's stretching that sound. He's stretching away from the turntable this way, he's stretching this way. So I think that was just and I don't know how he picked that up. Nobody's ever been able to tell me, you know, how Screw picked the way of wiring his turntables up. But I really think that that was a part of it. And I really don't think that Screw was a drummer when he was in middle school. I don't think he went really super far with it. He did play some piano, but he played drums. And I always think of Screw as a really great drummer, because a really great drummer is nothing like a drum machine. A drum machine will go like this on a metronome, and everything will be in exactly the same place. But if you really listen to even a really great drummer with an immaculate time, they're going to slow some things down. They're going to speed some things up. Sometimes you hear a snare hit a little bit harder. Sometimes you hear it a little bit softer. It Screw's exactly the same way. When you're listening to him wind songs back, songs as they're moving, and he's winding them back, he's got one song moving and lets the other one go exactly in that same spot. I really think that that was him visualizing the music and him stretching out the music as much as he can. And I think that you really have to have a really strong visual mind in order to produce that sort of sound and with those sorts of circumstances on your tables. So all of these artists, all of these now artists, spending time around Screw, soaking all of that up, you know, his skills then by their very nature, transferring onto them, what do you get? Screwed up click. You get artists that start to develop their own sense of who they are and their own sense of where they want to go with their music. All of it, I truly believe, informed by Screw's rhythms. Because if you listen to the SUC, it's not true of every rapper, but there's definitely a sort of rhythmic style that you can connect a lot of the rappers to. Fat Pat's a good example. Even look at Mr. 3-2, Lil Kiki, you know, and that sort of, you know, moves off into the generations that followed them. But I really think that they picked those rhythmic sensibilities up from Screw, and, you know, it says something, it goes right back to, like, being exposed to great art and being a part of great art. Look at what that produced. Look at where all of these artists have gone in the years since Screw has passed. You know, they've truly grown their own careers and gone in their own directions. And, you know, much in the same way as, like, if Screw had his DJ, you know, had his turntables wired up just like everybody else, would he have stretched the sound out in the same way? Who knows? All we know is that's where they went with it. So here we are, 20 years later, and Screw's music is not only still relevant, but you could argue that it is more relevant today, literally today, Friday, March 6th, than it was Wednesday, March 4th, because of what happened last night. Who was here last night? And who is visiting this museum for their first time, either last night or today? Very good. Art brings us together. Art brings all of us, connects all of us, and that's very much what Screw's tapes do. I had a plan for, you know, a lot of other stuff I was going to say, but I don't know that it could possibly really satisfy the stuff that's in y'all's heads. So I actually want to move it over to questions, because I think we're about at that point, because I think that's a much more interesting part. So we'll take questions for about the next 15 before we break for lunch. Does anybody have questions that I can answer? I know you do. Somebody's got to be the first. There we go.
What was he like as a man?
I didn't meet him.
Oh, never.
No, I never got to meet him. But I would venture to say that I know him as well as anybody who didn't actually know him. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, just in the work that I've been working on the book for 10 years, and, you know, I've done over 100 interviews for it, and I've built up a really massive library on DJ Screw, and I never met him in person. but you know, you go deep enough into somebody's history like that, and you kind of feel like you know them.
You're BOI?
I'm BOI. I'm from Galveston. Yes.
I made two. I'm out of town.
Right on. Other. Mm-hmm. No. That's too bad, though. I think that would have been really interesting to hear him behind some drums. Yeah. No, that was when he was in middle school in Smithville. So he was playing some drums and some piano. They had a piano. They actually had a drum kit in the house, but he never pursued it past Smithville.
Just a little bit of a humorous question, but
Uh-huh.
serious question as well. Are you more screwed up click or Swisher House? I said for humor.
I think well, I'm not writing a book on Swisher House, so okay. There you go. Yeah.
As far as the kind of like I would say a little bit of beef between South Side and North Side sounds.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel the difference between the two as far as a person who studies DJ Screw or historian of DJ Screw? How do you feel about the influence like it had on the North Side and how it kind of differentiates between the two?
Well, it definitely had influence. I mean, definitely. I mean, the influence is a big part of it because, you know, Screw influenced, you know, other genres. He continues to influence people. Yeah. But as far as how it compares, it doesn't compare because nothing compares from to going from vinyl to tape, and Swisher House didn't do that. So you know, that was the thing that attracted a lot of people to Swisher House. You know, so okay, well, it's on CD, it's crisp, it's on the radio. You know, I can get MP3s, whatever. Although I guess at the point when Swisher House started, that wasn't really the case. But yeah, I mean, DJ Screw recorded from vinyl to tape. You can't touch that. You know, there's nobody else that does that. I mean, I think that's really that's as much a part of the sound as anything because the way that the tape sort of soaked up the drums and took in the heaviness of the drums and the bass and also, you know, not for nothing, but kind of adds that layer of hiss, that kind of layer of fuzz, adds to that sort of static and the sort of calm, you know, meditative chaos that you hear on screw tapes. You know, you don't get that if you go to CD. Houston Quiet Storm?
Kind of like the Houston version of Quiet Storm.
Sure. Mm-hmm. There you go. Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit about how good of a DJ Screw was? I mean, not just simply, you know, making tapes, but maybe his competition.
Uh-huh.
You know, things that he competed in to show that he was skillful on the DJ level.
Yeah. Everybody talks about that because the thing is, you go back and listen to screw tapes, and when you hear his cuts and you hear the way he's winding things back and the way that, like, you know, I mean, the nature of the way he did things, 2 copies of the same record, one of them playing a little bit behind the other one, so that, like, if you move your crossfader from one of them, you're hearing something that just happened in this song, right here in this song. But how many tapes have you listened to of his where then he takes that record that he's got lined up perfectly and then winds it way back and repeats a whole verse or a whole phrase? I mean, like to even know where to go and to continuously do it and to do it really fast. Because anytime you listen to a screw tape, what you hear on there is fast, like the cuts are really fast. But the reality is all of these were recorded in real time. They were all recorded fast. So if you're going back and listening to him making those cuts in slow motion when he made the dub, and they're that much faster in real life. Yeah, he was an incredible DJ. Everybody talks about that. You know, DJing behind his back, and yeah, he went to New York and won a DJ competition. He went to New York and he was awarded a ring by Justo Faison in 1999 for his contributions to hip hop. But while he was up in New York on that same trip, he went out and won a DJ competition in New York. So yeah, he was no joke. He could really be put up against just about anybody, especially considering that, like, you know, with the style that he was doing, nobody else was touching that. Nobody else was mixing things the way that he was, you know, taking, you know, one record and layering it over another one to where you're hearing another record coming through really early, another one, which creates a whole new kind of warped, you know, prism of sound. And that's what he was going for. And that's what I was talking about whenever I say that I feel like he could really visualize things, because he could really see which way he was twisting something. And he had to, you know, because some of the stuff he's doing is just too far out there. And the reality is, he didn't have much gear, you know. It's not like He didn't have computers. He didn't really have any. He had a few processors, but not really. You know, he didn't really go deep into that end. Like what Screw did the best was show us that the turntable is a really simple instrument that you can get very, very complicated with. Yes, sir.
Who do you think Screw would have liked today?
You know what? I'm glad you brought that up because I meant to say that when I was talking. I talked to K-Dub Watson the other day, which if anybody doesn't know, he does a radio show with Bobby Fatts on Monday nights on KPFT that you should very much listen to. And he said, you know, the thing I was thinking about Screw is that he really saw people. He really heard people, and he really saw people, and he saw people that weren't necessarily moving. You know, it's easy to see somebody who's moving in the direction that they're going. Okay, well, this person's on the up and up. That's easy to see, but that's not the kind of people he saw. You know, he was looking for misfits, and he was looking for people who had something really special. And what K-Dub said, he's like, I think about it sometimes, like, how many potentially great artists have been overlooked in the past 20 years because Screw wasn't here to see them? You know, maybe somebody else saw them eventually, but how many others, like, maybe were on the verge of going in that direction, and there was just nobody here to encourage them or to see them like that, and to know that that person was special. As far as who he would have liked now, Cal Wayne. I think he would love Cal Wayne. Yeah, I don't know who else though, but plenty. I mean, you know, Houston's still full of amazing talent, you know, and that's never stopped, you know. But the question is just like, who else would he have brought into his orbit? Who else would he have seen? You know, we can't know. Other questions?
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about like the car culture, especially on the South Side, and how those kind of influence one another, Screw's music and vice versa with car culture?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing with codeine. You know, people always make the connection, but you know, the reality is, like, when people were talking on the tapes and they were freestyling on the tapes, they were just talking about their lives. And car culture had been in Houston, you know, for years before that. You know, the whole McGregor Park parties that I was talking about in the early '80s. You know, those were full of cars. You know, not outfitted exactly in that same direction because the culture was evolving over the years, and especially once you started seeing more car shows here, Los Magnificos and everything like that, where people had a platform to show off what they were doing. You know, so you know, it's much in the same way with syrup. It was something that was here already and that was popularized on the tapes, and attention was drawn to it from the tapes. Yeah, I don't know where else I was going with that. But yeah, it's all over the tapes. I mean, I think that's part of really definitely what drew attention to that from the outside. Other questions? Yes, sir.
I have one, like, it's actually another two-piece question. Actually, the first one's a little bit more personal, but when it comes to like the past years you've been doing your research and studying and Screw, I know me personally, a lot of times, like, I'm leaving Houston or whatever like that, and I hear like a song where I'm like, I'm word for word, like Pimp and Dance by Lil Kiki is like that song for me. What is that song for you, like, as far as the research that you've been doing, that you hear, and you like, oh, I gotta get it. Like right now, we got the Southside playing, and it's hard for me not to like drop this one time, you know. But what is that song for you, like, you know, as far as like out of DJ Screw's collection that brings that feeling of like, you know, this is Houston right here?
Well, not necessarily out of Screw's collection, but "Swang Down" by Southside Players. Okay. I think is such a an amazing anthem, and also just because of what it references. You know, "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot." You know, and mixing that in. She's talking about swang down. So it's like them taking really in history and culture and merging it with what they're doing now, and exactly, and amplifying it. So that's a favorite, but also his mix of Ghetto Stars by Botany Boys is a big one for me, and that's because when I was talking earlier about him winding back records, there's one spot in that song where he winds a record back like impossibly far, and you're just listening to it and you've lost it. You're okay, I've lost it. I don't know where the beat is. I don't know where he's going, and then all of a sudden, bam, he's right back in there, and you're like, how the fuck did you do that? You know, it's amazing.
That's how it be. You
Yeah.
in the club and they, hold on, bring that shit back.
Yeah.
All right, then my second question and my last question would be, now of course we know like the influence that DJ Screw's had on current culture today, as far as culture as well, you know, back in the day. Do you think he would have impact or the same impact or the impact that he did have if it wasn't for, and I'm not trying to, influence or speak up on it, but if it wasn't for like the codeine influence or promethazine, like the things that were like, like the drugs and the drug references that were going on around that time, do you think his music and stuff would be that powerful without it?
Do I think his music would be powerful if there weren't any drugs involved?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But, you're also talking about artists.
Yes,
You're also talking about artists. So it's like, do they get to the same point themselves? Does he get to the same point? I don't know. Can it be enjoyed without? Oh, yeah. Definitely. Yeah. I mean, for sure. It's high art, and like that's what I was saying earlier. This is evidence. It's high art. It's high art, it's fine art that continues to reveal its complexities. You go through and you go back and you listen to the tapes, and it continues to give you something. Every time you go back and listen to a Scrooge tape, there's another little thing that comes out. And sometimes it's just like him slowing down something and him going, cuz, just slowing something down, really dropping the bottom out of a part of a tape. You never know. Or sometimes it's a part where there's like 5 guys all yelling and getting on the mic, and it's just like I said, that just insane kind of chaos of everything that's happening out there. But that's so beautiful, man. That's catching art like while it's running. Maybe running pretty slow, but it's running.
It's like watching Friday over and over again. No, I'm serious. You watch that scene where you see Miss Parker, and you're like, dang, Miss Parker fine as hell. But then 20 years later, you realize Miss Parker watering the grass. Well, she watering dirt, ain't no grass there. Watch Friday when you guys get home. You see her, she's watering dirt, bro. She fine, but she's watering dirt.
Get a little something of that for my cataract. 5 minutes? Okay, so we got time for a couple more. Donnie.
How long did it take to create 3 in the morning?
3 in the morning, that's a very good question. I talk about this in the book. How long did it take to create 3 in the morning? 5 years. Yeah, because he was doing versions of that tape forever. He started doing versions of that tape probably in 1990, because Shorty Mac was given a tape in the spring of 1991 that said 3 in the morning on it. And he spelled it different ways and everything, but there were several different versions of that. So what you're talking about is actually when he got into the studio, he went to record with Maestro, and he had 4 turntables. That part of it took forever for all kinds of various reasons why it kept getting pushed back. That part of it you're probably talking about is more like about 2.5 years. But overall, more like 5 years that he was working on that.
So the 4 turntables, there's so much going on. He actually was using 4. He wasn't dubbing himself.
He was using 4 turntables. Yeah.
How do you think Screw would adapt to the technology today?
I hate to think about it because I love the fact that he didn't use a computer. I love the fact that he didn't go to CD. So, I like to think that if Screw was still around, he'd still be doing the same shit. And he'd just be like, no, y'all keep all that. I'm just doing what I'm doing. I'm making my money. People would still have tape players in their cars if he was still alive. I really think so. I mean, I think, from what everybody says in the interviews that I've done, like he was moving in that direction. He really was moving in the direction of like getting internet orders and recording to CDs and actually being able to manufacture his own CDs. He was moving in that direction, but, who knows, I mean, CDs weren't long enough, during his lifetime for that to even happen. Okay, I think we're going in there. They've got lunch, and I'll still hang out. So if you got other questions you didn't want to ask in front of everybody, come ask me. I'll be here. Thanks, y'all. I appreciate it.